Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Decameron. Written in 13 something by Giovanni Boccaccio in Italy during the time of the plague. Like, right after the plague, I think. Day the first. Here beginneth the first day of the Decameron, wherein, after demonstration made by the author of the manner in which it came to pass that the persons who are hereinafter presented foregathered for the purpose of devising together, so people gathering for fun, under the governance of Pampania, is discoursed of that which is most agreeable unto each. And that's the title of the chapter. And the subtitle. As often, most gracious ladies, as, taking thought in myself, I mind me how very pitiful you are all by nature, so often do I recognize that this present work will, to your thinking, have a grievous and a weariful beginning, inasmuch as the dolorous remembrance of the late pestiferous mortality, which it beareth on its forefront, is universally irksome to all who saw or otherwise knew it. But I would not therefore have this affright you from reading further, as if in the reading you were still to fare among sighs and tears. Let this grisly beginning be none other to you than is to wayfarers a rugged and steep mountain, beyond which is situate a most fair and delightful plain, which latter cometh so much the pleasanter to them as the greater was the hardship of the ascent and the descent. For, like as dolour occupieth the extreme of gladness, even so are miseries determined by eminent joyance. This brief annoy, I say brief, inasmuch as it is contained in few pages, is straightway succeeded by the pleasance and delight which I have already promised you, and which, belike, were it not aforesaid, might not be looked for from such a beginning. And in truth, could I fairly have availed to bring you to my desire otherwise than by so rugged a path as this will be, I had gladly done it. But being in a manner constrained thereto, for that, without this reminiscence of our past miseries, it might not be shown what was the occasion of the coming about of the things that will hereafter be read, I have brought myself to write them. I say then that the years of the era of the fruitful incarnation of the Son of God had attained to the number of 1348, 1348, when into the notable city of Florence, fair over every other of Italy, there came the death-dealing pestilence, which, through the operation of the heavenly bodies or of our own iniquitous dealings, being sent down upon mankind for our correction by the just wrath of God, had some years before appeared in the parts of the east, and after having bereft these latter of an innumerable number of inhabitants, extending without cease from one place to another, had now unhappily spread towards the west, and thereagainst no wisdom availing, nor human foresight, whereby the city was purged of many impurities by officers deputed to that end, and it was forbidden unto any sick person to enter therein, and many were the counsels given for the preservation of health. Nor yet humble supplications, not once but many times, both in ordered processions and on otherwise made unto God by devout persons, about the coming in of the spring of the aforesaid year, it began on horrible and miraculous wise to show forth its dolorous effects. Yet not as it had done in the east, where, if any bled at the nose, it was a manifest sign of inevitable death. Nay, but in men and women alike there appeared, at the beginning of the malady, certain swellings, either on the groin or under the armpits, whereof some waxed of the bigness of the common apple, others like unto an egg, some more and some less, and these the vulgar named plague boils. From these two parts the aforesaid death-bearing plague boils proceeded in brief space to appear and come indifferently in every part of the body, wherefrom, after a while, the fashion of the contagion began to change into black or livid blotches, which showed themselves in many, first on the arms and about the thighs, and after spread to every other part of the person, in some large and sparse, and in others small and thick sown. And like as the plague boils had been first, and yet were a very certain token of coming death, even so were these for everyone to whom they came. To the cure of these maladies nor counsel of physician nor virtue of any medicine appeared to avail or profit aught, On the contrary, whether it was that the nature of the infection suffered it not, or that the ignorance of the physicians, of whom, over and above the men of art, that number, both men and women, who had never had any teaching of medicine, was become exceeding great, availed not to know whence it arose, and consequently took not due measures thereagainst. Not only did few recover thereof, but well nigh all died within the third day from the appearance of the aforesaid signs, this sooner and that later, and for the most part without fever or other accident. And this pestilence was the more virulent, for that, by communication with those who were sick thereof, it gat hold upon the sound, no otherwise than fire upon things dry or greasy, whenas they are brought very near thereunto. Nay, the mischief was yet greater, for that not only did converse and consortion with the sick give to the sound infection of cause of common death, but the mere touching of the clothes, or of whatsoever other thing had been touched or used of the sick, appeared of itself to communicate the malady to the toucher. It's because the plague was carried by fleas, and fleas would stay in people's clothes and bedding, from what I understand. A marvelous thing to hear is that which I have to tell, and one which, had it not been seen of many men's eyes and of mine own, I had scarce dared credit, much less set down in writing, though I had heard it from one worthy of belief. I say then that of such efficience was the nature of the pestilence in question, in communicating itself from one to another, that not only did it pass from man to man, but this, which is much more, it many times visibly did, to wit, a thing which had pertained to a man sick or dead of the aforesaid sickness, being touched by an animal foreign to the human species, not only infected this latter with the plague, but in a very brief space of time killed it. Of this mine own eyes, as hath a little before been said, had one day, among others, experience on this wise, to wit, that the rags of a poor man who had died of the plague, being cast out into the public way, 2 hogs came up to them, and having first, after their wont, rooted amain among them with their snouts, took them in their mouths, and tossed them about their jaws. Then, in a little while, after turning round and round, they both, as if they had taken poison, fell down dead upon the rags with which they had in an ill hour intermeddled. From these things and many others like unto them, or yet stranger divers fears and conceits, were begotten in those who abode alive, which well nigh all tended to a very barbarous conclusion, namely, to shun and flee from the sick and all that pertained to them, and thus doing each thought to secure immunity for himself.